Welcome in, everyone. Welcome to Care Concierge with Care Patrol, where education is the heart of everything we do. It's great to have you here today. It's a beautiful Friday here in Birmingham, where I am, and I appreciate you joining us as well. I hope that it's a beautiful day where you are. And when it is so glorious outside as it is today, it reminds me that there are those of us in our state and around the world, but in our state, who are seeing a much different day. And I'm speaking of those people who were victims of the most recent tornado. I had the privilege yesterday of being with and talking with a woman who, her child lives in Selma and grandchildren live in Selma, and they were her grandchildren are in daycare, and in their daycare, when the tornado came, they all huddled in one space and were saved, survived the tornado gratefully. But the daycare itself was obliterated. There's nothing remaining of it except where these children were. And so it reminds me of both the glorious power and grace of God, but I don't want to be preachy, but that these children were saved amidst all of this destruction. And reason I bring it up today, because it's such a beautiful day, is a day like this, when it's pretty outside, brings to me the same amount of hope as does the knowing that these children were spared, and that Selma will rebuild, however slowly and painfully. So do think about these folks when you're going about your day, and if we can do anything as individuals, I hope we will. And if nothing else, send up a prayer. So thank you for being here. I'm sorry to be preachy in the beginning of the day. I just am so struck by the beauty of the day, particularly given the strange weather we've had. Today, we're discussing qEEG, or I say qEEG, it's actually qEEG, brain mapping, and I don't really know the appropriate way to address it. Now, many of you know that Care Patrol brings you continuing education on Mondays and Fridays of each month, 6 times a month. And we're accredited by the Board of Social Work in Alabama, and also by the Board of Nursing Practitioners in Alabama, to create, provide, credential, and offer these contact hours to you. And I hope they are enriching to you, and that the information, if it doesn't enrich you professionally, perhaps it will touch you personally. But you may not know who Care Patrol is. We're a placement agency. That means that we look to folks like you to tell us about clients or loved ones who may need help in finding the next option on the track of their wellness or healthcare journey, whether that would be community placement, which is where we specialize, or finding the right home health or nursing home rehab, which is also where we educate. So Care Patrol depends on folks like you to refer clients to us to place in these facilities, and the facilities pay us, so we're free to your clients. And I hope that you believe enough in what we do that if you have someone in that journey, that you'll remember us and allow us to talk with them. And even if it doesn't result in money, and I'll tell you, about 65% of the time we don't get paid. So about 65% of the time we talk with people, meet with people, assess them, tell them what their options are, talk them through the next steps in whether they're in the hospital or rehab or whatnot. And then, they, for whatever reason, don't have a choice or don't make a choice, that we can be compensated. So we don't mind doing that, is my point. I don't want you to feel like you only have to have someone that can afford care to send them to Care Patrol. That's not true. So we care about them and we care about you, and I'll get on a little bit more with our housekeeping. We're still having people join us. So hello, Ms. Chestnut. Good afternoon to you. And we've got more people joining. So I'll continue again with our topic for the day is qEEG brain mapping. And this topic, like all of our topics, was suggested to us by someone on a previous contact hour evaluation. And we ask in our evaluation, which you must do to get a certificate and proof that you did the contact hour, you must do the evaluation. And in the evaluation, we ask you, what are some topics you'd like us to address? And I'm hoping that these are topics that are, in your sort of professional line of work, and they may not be, it may be something else, but whatever it is, we depend on you as well for topics. Today's topic was suggested to us, and it was really new to me. And I hope that I'm not, too 101 for you today in terms of what I can offer you about the topic, but it was intriguing. And it is about at least in some ways, mental health, which is a topic that we like to address here on Care Concierge, just because, as we all know, there's not enough attention paid to mental health issues. Our survey today, which is password protected, is at SurveyMonkey. Those of you who've joined us in the past, and I see many of you who have, and thank you for coming back. Our survey today is at SurveyMonkey, and I'm going to read that address for those of you who are participating by phone or not able to see a screen, or otherwise wouldn't get the link. I'll read it to you now. It is https://www.surveymonkey.com/all uppercase letters X, T as in Tom, W, Y, Q, F as in Frank, G as in grand. And I'm posting it now into the chat room as well. Well, I think I am, maybe I'm not. I'll read it one more time for y'all in the hopes that I can also get it. Here we go, into the chat room. There we go. For those of you who just joined, it's in the chat room for you as well. I'll read it though. It's https://www.surveymonkey.com/all uppercase letters X, T as in Tom, W, Y, Q, F as in Frank, G as in grand. So that is today's survey link. Remember, if you've been with us, we give the password out around 12:45, 12:50, and generally someone who's been with us before is kind enough to remind me that I've forgotten to give the password. So rest assured, we'll get the password out today. That's the survey link. You must do the survey in order to get the certificate. Now, nurses, we post your hour onto the ABNP website, which is what they asked us to do. The Board of Social Work asked us to not do that, but have social workers post their own hours. And the reason we do a password is that this enables social workers to present this hour as a live or face-to-face hour, so long as they include with the certificate the email that I'll send out tonight or in the morning with the certificate and proof that you were in attendance. I'm letting some people in, and we will get started, y'all. So we have three objectives, as we do in all of our presentations. And these are fairly simple. And again, this is a fairly simple CEU. There are those of you that may like more teeth to it, and I'm sorry to not be able to give you that because it is a very complex topic. But we're going to define and we're going to discuss qEEG brain mapping. And when I say discuss, I do really hope you guys will be comfortable discussing by unmuting your mic and actually talking with all of us, or if not, by entering information or questions or comments or experiences into the chat room. If you're not familiar with Zoom or using the chat room or unmuting your mic, take your cursor and move it up to the top of your screen or down to the bottom of your screen, and a bar will pop up with words like chat and an icon for microphone. You click on those, and that's how you enter the chat. Daphne Wilson is asking a question. I'm going to answer it. If I click enable editing on the CEU certificate, I can add my name and social work license information to the CEU certificate. Do I still need to print out the email and put it with the CEU certificate? I do not believe that you do. That's why I send them as a Word document. But this is what I was told. But it was only because, and it's a proper question, Daphne, it's only because we didn't include those. But I do include the ability for you as social workers or nurses, for that matter, or anyone, to put in your information and your license number. And I hope that is a benefit to you. So our second objective is going to be learning how qEEG might be used with addiction treatments. And then we'll also discuss other areas of mental health for which qEEG brain mapping may be helpful. And so I want to ask y'all, I mean, this is a large group for a Friday, and I'm really very honored. So there must be some interest in qEEG brain mapping. And I wonder if you want to unmute or otherwise just tell us what is your familiarity with qEEG brain mapping? Are you familiar with it? Have you worked with it? Do you have experience clinically with it? Have you read about it, heard about it? Any experience at all with it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I want you all to know and to remember that when you are here in these contact hours, this, I hope, is a safe place. And I hope it's a place where you'll feel that you have the right and that you have the want to speak if you have something on your mind, and that you'll be received, and that there's a space here for you. And I also want you to remember that when you speak and add to the conversation, it enriches us all. And so I appreciate that of you. This is new to me. I'm not sure, ladies, what you're saying.
This is Hardella.
New to me. I got you. I'm sorry, I interrupted someone.
This is Hardella Morgan, Region 2 Community Services in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And this is very new to me. That's why I was interested in it, because I've never heard of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you for speaking too. Not familiar with it, but wanted to know more. Very new to me. Well, it's good. It's new to all of us. So I'll feel less pressure to be smart, because that's a hard thing. Let me move some things out of the way. We know that the brain is really sort of an electrical power grid. I think all of us have that, knowledge just sort of within us. And what we may not know, I didn't know, is that the number of neural connections in the brain is 1 followed by 12 zeros. That happens to be printed on the screen, and that's 1 trillion. So that number of neural connections within our brains is as large as the number of the stars in the galaxy. And by that, I mean the Milky Way. So in that Milky Way, the human brain is yet the most complex thing about which we know. The first studies involving brain mapping were conducted in the late 1800s by a Paul Broca. And his interest was in learning how language works in the brain, because he worked at that time with victims of strokes. And in his observations, he found that he could sort of map out the areas of the brain that had been affected by the stroke that had damaged the speech center in his patients, which led him to believe, naturally, that there were distinct regions within the brain all over that had different responsibilities for different functions. Now, we have done a CEU in the past on cognitive psychology and its sort of beginnings in the 60s and then progressing into the 80s and on today. And so, naturally, when we began doing experimental psychology, we started looking at brain imaging and brain mapping again. And the first thing that folks settled on to try and understand the brain or mapping the brain was positron emission tomography or a PET scan. And then they followed that by functional magnetic resonance imaging or MRIs. And they saw a different, naturally, picture of how the brain might function and support mental activities. And so as techniques grew significantly more sophisticated over time, over the last 50 or 60 years, then researchers began looking at the possibility of being able to see when the brain lights up or moves or does something related to, a function of the human existence. And so the advances in brain mapping to date have led to new insights into cognition and behavior as well as disorders. So the electroencephalogram, EEG, records human brain electrical activity by electrodes placed over the surface of the scalp, which reflects underlying cortical activity, which we commonly call brainwaves. Now, how many of you have worked with these technologies, PET scans, MRIs, EEGs? I know you may not have experience, as we sort of discussed, with the qEEG, but do you have experience with the EEG or the PET scan or the MRI? Anyone have familiarity there and maybe can lean some support to this discussion? And I'll keep going, but you can always, please remember, interrupt me. Now, the EEG is a scientific measurement and it records electrical activity throughout the different parts of the brain. Quantitative electroencephalography, or the qEEG, is an all-inclusive computer-generated analysis of the brain's electrical activity. And this pinpoints any underlying medical issues, and it allows us to obtain metrics and data that we can then create treatment plans around. So it's becoming now increasingly common as a tool that we use to diagnose neurological disorders. Now, the American Academy of Neurology and the American Clinical Neurophysiology Society, say that 3 times, both agree that qEEG is a complementary method in the diagnosis of epilepsy, vascular diseases, dementia, and encephalopathy. And the FDA has cleared the software used for 6 qEEG systems as Class II medical devices that are qualified for clinical use by qualified medical personnel and for the statistical evaluation of such. So be very clear then, when we talk about a qEEG, we are not talking about a single thing, okay? It's not a unit, it's not a test in and of itself. what it is what it says it is. It's a quantitative analysis of a series of tests. And using algorithms that are, 6 of which are classified by the FDA, it's determined then, what lights up at certain times and what that may mean. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense yet. Hopefully it will in a second. And so as a for instance, the other, another a medical device that would be qualified as a class 2 would be a blood pressure cuff. And so it's a diagnostic tool, and it is especially proven valuable to some cases of epilepsy. But note that in 97, now this is 25 years ago, is it? This was the last I could find on it. In 97, the American Academy of Neurology and the American Clinical Neurophysiology Society said that the qEEG could also be known to provide false positive errors. And they considered at the time that it be used only in an investigational sense for head injury, post-concussion, learning disabilities, attention disorders, schizophrenia, depression, alcoholism, and abuse. So the process of qEEG, as I said, uses a number of neuroimaging techniques, which include functional magnetic resonance imaging, MRIs, electroencephalography, lots of big words today, EEG, and magnetic, I'm going to start over, magnetoencephalography, or MEG. And each technique serves a particular purpose. The MRI scans identify the parts of the brain that are active during specific tasks, such as reading, or doing something that requires hand-eye manipulation, like playing a video game. The EEG measures the electrical activity on the surface of the scalp, and the MEG detects the changes in the magnetic field around the head. And the qEEG software lays these 3 scans on top of each other and any others, and forms then a greater picture of the whole. So this you probably know. This is no great news, but our brain has hubs in it. Remember, it's these neural exchanges, of which there are 1 trillion. And the various workings within those hubs control our memories, for example, and our ability to form memories, our decision-making, our ability to process emotions correctly, and other essential cognitive functions. So when the hubs in the brain are adversely affected, so goes the thinking behind qEEG. Then those adverse effects manifest as symptoms such as memory loss, or attention deficiency, or depression, anxiety, or other psychological issues like addiction. And the EEG sensors would be placed on a client's head. Has anyone ever had an EEG or performed an EEG? I guess we sort of hit the no one's performed one. Has anyone had one? I would like to have that cap for Halloween. I can say that. So the EEG sensors would be placed on the head as such, and then the software would interpret the data. So the performance patterns of the client while wearing the EEG sensors would be calculated from a normative database that's acquired from thousands and thousands of other brains and is approved by the FDA. So your brain in the cap would be compared by the software immediately to all other brains that had ever been mapped that were also approved by the FDA as being worthy of being included in the normative database. Then from that, the calculations would be made as to where there may be interruptions in the hubs within the brain of the person wearing this device. So they calculate then, the qEEG software calculates a Z-score based on this signal and the sensor locations and the age and the gender and whether one's eyes are open or one's eyes are closed. And this information, this Z-score, has a normative value of 0.0. And then positive and negative values would be within 0.2% either direction. This would be where we would begin to think, okay, there may be some interruption, some abnormality, something here that's causing this to be abnormal. And then the report could show norm as versus the abnormal. But the interesting thing about the normative databases is age-based. So you're only compared against brains that are your own age, gender, etc. And Amy Jo Mann says she has not had, my sister has done one of these EEGs. Thank you for answering, y'all. Sorry, I'm late to the party. I'm using a touch screen today, which is a little bit cumbersome for me, and I apologize for that. The software then, the qEEG software, summarizes all of this data into color-coded maps. Now, if you've been watching the screen through the presentation, each screenshot or each screen would have a photograph of a qEEG reading of one type or another. And so you can begin to see then that, like in this particular screen with an ADHD, they're firing in a red zone, meaning they're abnormally, one way or the other from the norm. And of course, because it's the frontal lobe, it means they have things like problems paying attention. So it's clearly kind of shown on this slide. The color red represents a higher amplitude than the database, and blue is a lower. And again, this would be 0.2% swing either way. The increments are standardized units. And the representation provides us a sense of how the brain is functioning against this sample population, this normative database. The most studied of the metrics of the qEEG are the different frequency bands and the ratios of those bands one to the other. And I'm not going to get very deep into this because it's mostly algorithms and mathematics based. And quite frankly, it's a little over my head. But I can tell you what I have been able to sort of understand is that the literature around the qEEG distinguishes delta, theta, alpha, and beta frequency bands and relates them with distinctive states. This is the work of Niedermeyer and Kropotov. And according to them, the delta band is predominant during sleep, deep sleep, so REM sleep, dreaming sleep. The theta band is involved in memory encoding and retrieval and associated with power increases during drowsiness. The alpha band is involved in motor functions, so over the motor cortex and the cognitive function. And then the beta band indicates inhibitory cortical transmission and is associated with power increases during active concentration. So the metrics are derived from applying power spectral analysis to the EEG sensors. It's estimated from EEG recordings using, as one technique, the Loretta low resolution electromagnetic tomography, which is widely used and accepted, and follows an absolute true bell curve. So if you can imagine that this number, this normative 0.0 number is a perfect bell curve, you can begin to see how it's age related, gender related, and otherwise. Then these metrics, again, make for 2 to 3 dimensional maps. So the database is built on the collection of the data during the resting or active states. So an active state would be performing a perceptual, motor, or cognitive task. A resting state, one would be doing a relaxed state with your eyes closed and eyes open. And what makes these resting state recordings particularly helpful is that they can be duplicated in each lab without any issue, right? You're sitting with your eyes open or you're sitting with your eyes closed. But in terms of performing tasks, each clinic or lab may have you do a different task, and that may affect the data. Brain mapping offers extensive data-driven information on the physical structure of the brain, and this is beneficial, as I'm sure you can guess, for a variety of reasons. Each lobe of the brain has to maintain specific brainwave levels to be optimal. And if, for example, someone had a low frontal alpha during eyes closed and high frontal delta during eyes closed, this might reveal why the client was struggling with hyperactivity or impulsivity. And so you can see that with the qEEG brain mapping, you also need someone well-versed in it to interpret the data. This reminds me a little of DNA testing for the efficacy of pharmaceuticals and over-the-counter drugs, which we talked about, I think, last Friday with Dr. Phyllis Grauer. It's one thing to have this data and these wonderful studies. It's quite another to put them into practice. So certainly you would need to be a clinic or a practitioner that knew how to read and make use of the data. And only then, I think, could you get a deeper understanding and working of the brain. So the largest research on qEEG has been done with certain disorders, ADHD in children being high among those, and it has been the most consistent and validated. And it has also been highly validated for schizophrenia and depression and obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, this is of 2019. So you see, this is 22 years after it was shown to only be an aid and a diagnostic tool. It's now shown to be a validated tool in these various ways. And what we found in the research, well, I say we, I certainly did none of it. What they found in the research is that many types of mental illness can benefit from brain mapping. And one, there's really two that sort of follow the same path as autistic or autistic spectrum disorder and anxiety disorder follow some of the same paths and are treated in the same way. So I guess the way to then view this qEEG testing, or brain mapping rather, is a little bit like a bacterial culture that a physician might order to determine which antibiotic would best treat an infection. And the brain map, in the same way as with the culture, will tell us if the symptoms are neurologically based or linked neurologically. And if they are linked neurologically, then there's a higher probability of treatment success using qEEG. So the other piece of this that I think makes it at least anecdotally valid would be, yes, I'm not sure who asked, but you will get a copy of this. And every one of our contact hours that I do, I send a presentation. And when our other speakers have a presentation that they allow me to send, I send that as well. So hopefully those of you that have been with us a while are starting to develop a little library of information that you can share with clients or others. But what I was getting at was that I believe that seeing these changes is a way for some people to begin to take ownership of their mental health and of changing their mental health. And you can just sort of guess that if someone had an initial brain map done and then had a treatment plan followed and then had a follow-up qEEG, you could see then that they could see very definite, I'm sure, changes. And these are color-coded, remember. And by seeing that, I believe it would reinforce the willingness to continue down that path, if only because it might be neat to see the colors change, but certainly knowing that when the colors change, the person is changing. Does insurance pay for this? Are these tests ever covered by insurance? I would put myself out there and say no, only because when I was looking for this topic, there are very few scholarly articles. There's some abstracts, but not a lot of articles, and I spent a lot of time on this. But there are quite a number of labs that discuss, their use of these techniques. And so because they're labs, because they're on the internet and advertising their service, and just the language within those, I'm going to believe that no, I'm going to believe that insurance does not pay for it. But I will look into it and I'll have an answer for y'all by the time I send this certificate out. How about that? And so you can see that this might be powerful data. So what might be, given what we've discussed today and very sort of briefly brushed, what might be some treatments where you could see recommending someone for a qEEG? If you have a client, and I suspect from those of you who asked about insurance coverage, you may have someone in mind or some treatment course in mind for certain folks. Is that true? Does anyone have an idea? Did anyone think, I wish I could have this patient or that person seen in this way? I wish insurance would pay for it. This may be true. And I think it would be, I just don't think so, because again, it's also used a lot in addiction treatment. And generally that's not covered by insurance, at least not fully. So almost all narcotics and alcohol cause your brain to release unnatural levels of dopamine, and it affects our limbic systems. And we know that chronic drug and alcohol users are found to have disrupted neural pathways for dopamine and other neurotransmitters. And every narcotics has its own specific damage. For example, studies show that alcoholism can reduce the blood flow to the brain and affect our problem solving, our memory, our judgment. And this is because the frontal lobe is being affected by the alcohol abuse. It affects the brain metabolism. What is good to know is that if someone can both afford and access qEEG treatment and neural programming, then they can return from that state, at least physically. Methamphetamines confront the frontal lobe, and it reduces prefrontal cortex activity, which is the part of the brain that helps with decision making. Now, if you've ever dealt with people who are methamphetamine addicts, you know that they make horrible decisions. And this, again, can be, in a sense, reversed through obviously abstinence first, but through use of this test and these procedures in follow-up. Same is true for cocaine, and you can read the screen as well as I. But what's interesting is that the amygdala in cocaine addicts is connected to having cravings for the drug, and this affects emotional learning, which slows down the ability to create and recall memories. And cocaine, unlike the other drugs, can have lingering abnormal effects. And then there's MDMA. I'm not going to read that, but we know it under different names these days. It used to be called ecstasy, I believe, and now, if I'm correct in trying to understand music, it's called Molly. And whatever it does, it can suppress your physical needs, and that indirectly affects the brain in the same way that the neurotransmitters are interrupted in the serotonin neurotransmitter by MDMA. All of these things you see. My point in building this is that whether you're on methamphetamine or heroin or whatever, your alpha, beta, delta, and theta waves are being interrupted. It's something that we can see. It's something that we can map. It's something that we can intervene in and treat and show real data and real proof of a change, a physiological change. And it has shown normalization, qEEG, in as little as 3 months. So I'll ask again, if any of y'all have any notion of other treatments that may be benefited by the qEEG brain mapping. I can certainly see how depression would be one that I think if someone could see who was depressed, someone could see their advancement and see the different maps that would be empowering for them. So with autism, which I mentioned earlier, as we know, the brain networks that regulate attention and executive function and language processing and understanding nonverbal social cues are missing in folks that have autism spectrum disorder. And there are different networks within the brain that communicate each of those arenas. And so we know that from the research that its functional connections between the brain regions is key for optimal brain functioning. And by that, I mean that these have to be in working order. So the brain map analysis measures the coherence between the different areas of the brain, the functional areas of the brain. And it measures how well those different areas communicate with each other to perform complex tasks. And we see that we need adequate coherence to have a healthy mind. Lindsay Sparks is autism spectrum. Thank you. Oh, that was your answer. Well, that was a great answer, Lindsay. In ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, we see using brain mapping that the symptoms of those conditions is often the result of a miswiring, if you will, or a dysregulation of the functions within the specific network. And it could also be a result at the same time of some of the networks failing to work together to carry out complex tasks. And if the miswiring or dysregulation is significant in ADHD, it is even more pronounced in autism, where the brain is functioning in relative chaos with lacking effective communication between the different regions. And so the person who has autism spectrum disorder becomes overwhelmed because of the inability for the brain to communicate the incoming stimuli. So based on the brain map analysis, neurofeedback protocols are developed. This is how this works. We take the brain map, we understand where the abnormalities are, and then we create a neurofeedback protocol that is developed to target a specific symptom linked to the functional network that is specific to that client that is shown to be abnormal or dysregulated. And here's the thing about the brain map. It's like a fingerprint. No two persons have a similar or have the same exact brain map. We're all different. And so this is where we have the normative database and the comparisons within, the 0.2 plus or minus. This is where we see that, that we rest. So if we have someone that is ADHD, then we might see that the attention network of the brain map is where we have significant abnormalities. And the neurofeedback treatment, which is the second step in the qEEG brain mapping, will target improving those functioning connections in the attention network, in this case of this child with ADHD, that are weak or disrupted. What we know, and clearly this is almost anecdotally true, that drugs cannot have the same level of specificity as a brain map. And so we believe then that when we create these neurofeedback-based treatments, they are very specific to the individual. And while they may not provide, although they could, temporary symptom suppression, as with drugs, they can help with retraining the brain to self-generate stable, healthier, functional connections and brainwave patterns that can minimize or reduce or even eliminate symptoms, whether this is someone who is suffering from opiate addiction, or someone who has depression, or someone who has just some issues with attention deficit. And that's one of the things that I've heard quite often lately, is that among a certain generation, the generation with whom I deal, the aging population, that ADHD was really was not a thing. It wasn't even a thing when I was coming up. And so I think we have a lot of adults then who may benefit from something as simple as this, who may not have a pronounced mental health disorder, but may have some attention issues. So the brain map guided neurofeedback treatment protocols enable the patient to, one, strengthen the connections in their brain, which is improved efficiency in their functional communication and task making, and the speed of information processing, which is their emotional ability to deal, as well as their intellectual ability and their ability for their brain to connect and talk and be functional. And we see that these neurofeedback treatment protocols almost always lead to a reduction of negative symptoms. I'm going to paste now, again, the password into, or the link into the chat room for y'all, followed by the password. Today's password is very simple. It's qEEG. Now, be aware that if you are speaking of or writing about or using the term, that the Q in qEEG is lowercase. So the EEG, which you've seen the acronym, EEG is all uppercase, but the qEEG is lowercase q, uppercase E, uppercase E, uppercase G. That's our password. And our Survey Monkey link, one more time, is https://www.surveymonkey.com/all uppercase letters X T as in Tom, W Y Q F as in Frank, G as in grand. Thank you all for being here today. I hope you have a terrific weekend. I hope that you will relax and refresh and be ready to continue to serve the clients that you serve. I appreciate what you do each day for those around you. And I hope that you will do something nice for yourself this weekend. If there are no more questions, then I will end today's recording. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you. I'll stick around for just a minute to make sure that there are no problems getting into the survey.
Thank you.
Again, the survey. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I was on the entire program on Monday, but I didn't get the password.
Oh, what did we talk about Monday?
My aching back, pain.
The password was painless, capital
Okay.
P, painless. Oh, thank you, Bailey Wright. She or he guessed it as well.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here and have a great weekend. And one more time, the password or the link is https://www.surveymonkey.com/lowercase r/all uppercase letters X T as in Tom, W Y Q F as in Frank, G as in grand. Everyone who wants to get credit for the hour must do the evaluation. It is password protected. The password is qEEG. That's lowercase q, all uppercase EEG. qEEG is the password. Please try and get your things done tonight. That way I can get the certificates out by email tonight or in the morning. And remember, we're loading the nursing hours for you, social workers. You can put your name and number in the certificate as it is left blank in a Word form for you. I will type the password, Ms. Jackson, if I can get my keyboard to come up. It is lowercase q, uppercase E as in Edward, uppercase E as in Edward, uppercase G as in grand. Thank you all. Thank you for being here. Have a great weekend. Treat yourselves. And I hope to see you on Monday when we will be discussing invisible disabilities.